There are many complications when we talk about the expectations of men. Society shoves this idea that men have to be sculpted to take on any problem, no matter how extensive it is. The most important thing in the world is for men to roll with the punches and not let anyone see them break. However, I can tell you that every man has a limit, and the closer you get to it, the more unhinged your actions become. This is something Tuca and Bertie took on with a very Speckle episode.
I'm with Tuca on this one. I know who I am. I'm Speckle. S for supportive. P for P.
I'm Tuca. T for tell someone else about it.
So this quick scene really places out a lot of the plots that will be set in this episode. Honestly, I really find it to be interesting how they portrayed the opening bit. Even with the episode being named a very Speckle episode, Speckle said very few words in this scene. In fact, Tuca being disrespectful to him by butting into spelling his name shows that he has a tendency to get shoved to the side from others. It's something that we're going to see often. Meanwhile, Tuca once again is taking the back seat for this episode as they take the time to poke fun at astrology nerds. Though I find it interesting that the signs they would be using are plants, considering that planthropomorphs exist in this universe. Whatever works, I suppose.
Mr. Good Guy, he's so sweet. Mr. Good Guy, very neat. Mr. Good Guy, oh my.
I think this is a great way to really emphasize how good of a person Speckle is, as we get a nice little montage of him doing great things for people as he heads to work. It really shows how much he can positively impact someone's day with his interactions and how his presence really elevates the environment. Just going out of his way to do even the smallest amount of kindness just shows how much of a great support he is to other people. So of course, these all go back into his plan for the community to give affordable housing to those that were impacted in the flood. With him being the one to come up with the plan, it really emphasizes how amazing it can be to do things that you love and being able to impact those that are in the most need. However, there are going to be some bumps on the way. And of course, it all falls on Speckle to get everything in order.
I heard there was a problem with my proposed affordable housing unit.
We're not comfortable with it being so open and inviting to,
Poor people.
Alright, let's have a conversation. This is something that has always irked me. The issue of compromising. Now, I do understand that when we have this topic on finding that middle ground, on paper it can be great because it gives everyone a little bit of everything. However, when you deal with those who care very little about the opposition and have much more power in society, their compromise is 90% in their favor. We'll talk more about that as the episode goes on. Though, focusing on Speckle, he obviously wants the plan to go through by any means necessary. While he isn't keen on the idea of being a gated and monitored community, he knows that these pompous jerks will easily cut the project if they don't receive what they want. The imagery being used in that was pretty fun as well. It's showing the figure of speech in holding back your tongue, which is something a lot of men have to deal with, considering that there's a time and place to say your opinion in front of authority figures. Speckle seems to have always felt that it's better to roll with the opposition to not foil his own plan. That usually ends well, right?
Hey, cool sneakers. Don't recognize them. You work on this floor?
Now we're starting to build up Speckle's safe space at work, which happens to be the lesser used restroom on the second floor. In addition to an unexpected friend that will be his ear throughout this episode. It's an unorthodox situation for this to be the space where Speckle lets out his issues, but then again, there aren't a lot of places that have a lot of privacy within the workplace. Heck, for Speckle, there really aren't a lot of spaces he can really call his safe haven at this moment. Plus, with a person who is open to having a conversation with him and let it all out, I think the best term for this is called a bro space, though there's a chance for it to turn into something else.
According to this astrology app, lily pads thrive in relationships. I gotta get into a relationship, Bertie.
Oh boy, here we go again. I think they're really shoving the impulsive route on Tuca a little too much in this episode. While I can understand that the idea of over-relying on astrology can really cloud a person's judgment, I think the way they're trying to force it is going to get really annoying really fast. Especially with the case of Tuca after having back-to-back relationships going down the toilet in an emotionally scarring way. I understand that this is a more minor plot in the series, and it would make sense for her to still actively look for a significant partner. It still felt a bit off-putting on how uncharacteristically quick she got over Vicky. Now we're seeing her dip into plushophilia. Yeah.
So, Speckle, how was your day?
Oh, I met with the local neighborhood council to discuss approval on the...
Actually, can we stop talking about work? I had a really stressful day.
Now we're reaching the end of the day for Speckle, and once again we see another window that is closed for him to express himself and his opinions. Though this one certainly hurts because the home should be the place where you have the freedom in doing so. Now, I do want to emphasize that for Bertie, it makes sense because I know her job is definitely stressful in its own right, and she's been able to have Speckle there to talk about her issues. We've seen it throughout the show plenty of times, and it makes sense that it doesn't change much here. This is considered a normal occurrence, so initially the seed planting of where this episode is going can be seen as very subtle. I also like the small details of the beginning scene with Bertie eating all the leftovers and not leaving much else for Speckle to eat for dinner. It's interesting because it can signify how Bertie takes majority of the free time to focus on herself rather than it being a two-way street, while also showing how Speckle is forcing himself to roll with that dynamic. While it can be seen as not very harmful, these small samples can slowly build into something major.
I heard there were issues with funding my building?
Affirmative. Due to budget cuts, the state requires a change in design.
Now we're starting to see the cycle of Speckle getting poor treatment. You really start noticing the differences when we compare the first edition to this one with the slight changes of the dialogue and how Speckle becomes a little less confident. From "don't talk to me until Speckle brings my coffee" to "don't talk to me until you bring my coffee" really changes the viewpoint of thinking that she sees it as a gesture of kindness to an expectation of someone to do. It shows that she doesn't consider Speckle to be of high value when she emphasizes his name constantly throughout the conversation. And picking up a book on leadership that is specifically for that was the icing on the cake, which I'll admit was a bit of a funny way to end the scene. When seeing Speckle speak to higher authority once again, this time with a more godlike looking figure, we see them wanting to add more changes to the building once again due to budgeting issues, and seeing Speckle's conscience getting the better of him to comply with these terrible offers that is lessening its impact for the community. Using the micro Speckle to emphasize once again that losing some is better than losing none, while also showing his mental state is draining. Then, when we arrive back to the bathroom, he's once again greeted by work boots. The dude offered Speckle time to hash out his issues going on with work, pushing it to be that safe haven Speckle desperately needed. The wordplay being used by him is very well executed, as it fits the setting of them being on a toilet. It's a subtle way to drive the comedy into the show, as well as solidifying how this was a time for him to let his feelings out. As the cycle continues, the more he falls deeper into this hole of despair.
Hey everyone, meet my new fiance.
Hello.
Alright, this this is something. So now we're seeing Tuca fall into the rabbit hole at an even more rapid pace, which definitely has gotten to the more creepier route. It's not really the most pleasant to watch when we compare it to Speckle's dive into madness, plus the bunny plush looks like it's going to haunt me in my dreams. Like, mentioning the ribbon removal could lead her head falling off like it's Wolf Among Us, or the mentioning of them having sex often. It's not very pleasant to witness, as it really feels like more of a distraction to the main plot. Meanwhile, to finish off the cycle for Speckle, seeing that Bertie continues to not pay attention to Speckle's interest and mainly wants to focus on her problems, which further pushes Speckle away from viewing her as a reliable asset as he continues to serve her needs.
Pleased to meet you. I'm Bruce!
Let's talk money. I'm rich now, so I can fund your, beautiful, shapely building. I just want to add one rule. Only hot people allowed.
What? That's absurd!
Alright, the final stretch that officially broke Speckle. This time from a multitude of shitty things. A crappy boss, and a myriad of vendors that want to put their own spin on the venue's use. First off, the boss flat out looked angry that Speckle didn't buy her coffee that morning. This really shows the huge sense of entitlement from her, like Speckle was in the wrong for not giving her what she expected, like it's supposed to be his job to do so. It comes off of feeding on this idea of hierarchy. With her being the manager of this business, it's clear that her mindset is that she is above the average worker, and her status should give her unwritten quirks that are given by those that work under her. Plus the amount of pressure in silencing his concerns of what Bruce wanted, which absolutely crushes on what Speckle wanted for the complex. That's the biggest problem with compromising with those of higher class. Usually it always ends up benefiting the 1%. The more moral route will always take the shorter end of the deal because they have very little to compensate in dealing. Compromising will always help the higher class more than those less fortunate. Not to mention the symbolism of this compromise of having affordable housing for one single floor while the rest is for those who are higher status gets the rest. The visual of towering over the needy is incredibly infuriating. With him not having the funds and forcing himself to accept the offered compromise leads him deeper into the place he doesn't want to be in. With Bertie not letting him hash out his problems when they're together, he decides to go to the place that has let him talk about him.
Everything falls on me! Even though I'm already doing so much, I wish someone would just help me for a change.
I know that feeling, my man. Hey, want to get out of here? Maybe hang out somewhere that isn't a toilet?
Yeah. What were you thinking?
Okay, I'm not going to lie. I thought this man was about to thirst down on Speckle. I'm sorry, I like men, okay? But this is the first time we are actually hearing Speckle hash out his issues. Quite clearly, he was very emotional about all that had happened. How every major decision that happened during this process was spat into his face because of the worker dynamic that was placed in a capitalist system, which in turn turned a project he was passionate about and was beautiful for those that are everyday people became something for the higher class jerk-off session for the wealthy. It makes sense that he goes to this dude, who we now know as Cliff, to let out those frustrations because all of his other possible avenues have not been truly available to him. Though in doing so, he begins to talk about that issue of not having more support, particularly with Bertie. And that was something that was going to bite him in the butt.
Oh, Speckle, I gotta go to the bathroom. You got the check, right?
Oh, leaving my man to pick up the tab. I guess feminism has its limits.
Yeah, Cliff is an incel. The problem with having this desperate avenue is that while at face value they can be seen as a good person with how they treat you, you don't really get to know what they're like until they interact with others in a public setting. Which in this case, Cliff is basically the result of graduating from Hustler University. An asshat that thinks very little of women, and the person Speckle became open with became the obstacle he had trouble with the past few days. This asshole forced Speckle into a spot where he looked terrible to Bertie by rehashing his complaints, which shows that you really shouldn't tell your problems unless you really trust them. The reason being is because there are going to be times where you are going to complain about a relationship. All experiences have bumpy roads, there's no way around it. However, hashing them out to anyone is begging for trouble because some people don't know how to keep their mouths shut. The dude's value of being a friend dipped demonstrably, and rightly so, with him saying things that could have easily ended a relationship. Now of course, Speckle is also to blame for this as well, because he never really fought back in any of the scenarios, even the ones Bertie herself was in, because he doesn't try to express that more to her. It's important to speak out rather than bottle it up inside. With nowhere else to turn, he gave in to something that was offered in the very beginning of the episode.
The good guy? Yeah, that's what I thought I was, but instead I'm a coward.
Nobody is one thing.
I could be this guy, the assertive man.
Yay! Misinterpretation! This is what desperation can do to a person. Astrology can be fun and useful, but the over-reliance on it can make a person insane. I believe implementing this back into the main plot was a lot more welcome because of how natural it felt for Speckle to do, and it shows that it can work in a serious setting. Of course, his misinterpretation of tarot cards really stuck home because he doesn't want to be seen as a weak individual that can't stand up to those of higher status. Now, I don't know too much about tarot cards, but from what I know, I believe that each card is a piece of your overall personality. That was something Draken was trying to explain, but Speckle wasn't willing to listen as he is set on being assertive.
Speckle was supposed to take us on a tour of the site. He is never late.
You all want a tour? I'll give you a tour!
He's not. Oh, wow.
Well, that was a way to make a statement. With how Speckle showed out, basically showed how the amount of stress can flat out destroy a man's health overall. There are ways to get around that, but unfortunately it was too late for Speckle to utilize them properly. Now with his mind all scrambled, he completely made an ass out of himself to the higher authority by doing the unthinkable. Which makes a nice transition cut off to the next scene where we see Tuca's story get wrapped with
Bunny's had enough woo-woo boast! So annoying. It's not very sexy. You're dead!
Yeah, figured. Not really a whole lot to say to a B-plot that clearly had very little thought to it.
Where have you been?
Never better. I just took a shit in front of my boss like a cool guy.
What?
And guess what? This cool guy got fired. Oh my god. Oh my god.
So, this bittersweet end to the story overall is a tough pill to swallow. Though it helps people understand that men can fall from grace just as hard if no one is willing to listen to their stress and pain they're dealing with. I really enjoyed how they had Bertie become the person to help Speckle because that's how the relationship should go. She doesn't have to apologize for not allowing him to hash out his experiences from day to day. Simply seeing that Speckle is crumbling lets her know what she needs to do. No words, just action is enough to help aid Speckle in this tough realization that he lost his job, which was fitting to end the story. Now, this episode is definitely a much needed one for a myriad of reasons. This whole concept of masculinity has been at the forefront in the past couple of months, and an episode like this tackles it pretty well. It also does great commentary on how the viewpoint of the 1% is deemed more important than the workers, and pushing certain projects to what they want can trickle in more than all at once. We also get to see the realization and danger of how those within a manosphere mindset can easily blend in without you realizing it, until they become completely masked off. While the B-plot clearly wasn't executed very well, I still think this episode carries a lot of impact as we focus on the mental state of men and how important it is to allow men to be vulnerable. Until then, good afternoon, good evening, and good night.